put this presentation together to try to share with you some answers that I came up with for myself to some questions that I had been asking myself, and I hope that you guys will get something out of this as well. Promised you philosophy here, so let me just hit you with something right off the bat here. I've always found pesticides, whether organic or chemical, to be the wrong answer. The systems of the natural world are elegant and logical. The idea of striving to create life-giving foods while simultaneously dousing them with deadly poisons is inelegant and illogical. I was aiming at a pleasant, natural way of gardening, which results in making the work easier instead of harder. I ultimately reached the conclusion that there was no need to plow, no need to apply fertilizer, no need to use insecticide. When you get right down to it, there are a few agricultural practices that are really necessary. Now, those aren't my words. I'll tell you here in just a little bit who said that. And that could be quite radical thought to some people, but those words meant a lot to me. I realized when I read those that was kind of the direction that I had been heading in my own garden. You know, I hadn't really formulated those thoughts in my mind yet. That really hit me when I read that. And I don't want you to think that's what this whole presentation is going to be about. I'm going to touch on a whole lot of other philosophies as well. And you know, you can find the ones that mean something to you, things that, you know, really impact me. You know, as I say, your results may vary. So what I've tried to do is put a lot of sources in here where if you're interested in some of these concepts that we touch on today, you'll have places to go to, you know, read and learn and hopefully find your own inspirations. So a question that kind of started nagging in my mind, you know, today we have this divide between conventional and organic, these two systems of agriculture. And, you know, now even our grocery stores and our food system is divided. You know, you go to the grocery store and now you have to choose, well, am I going to buy conventional food or organic food? And you know, how much time am I going to stand spend sitting here in the grocery store trying to figure out, you know, what I want to buy and all this. So, you know, I got to wondering, well, how did we end up to this point in history where we have this divide between agricultural systems? And I want to give you a little bit of background in how conventional agriculture came to be, and industrialization plays a big part in that. So we'll touch on a little bit of history that I find interesting and all that stuff. And again, I'm going to try to kind of expose you to a lot of different philosophies that are prevalent in organic agriculture, and a lot of the philosophers, the people that brought those thoughts forward. This is my email address, if y'all want to make note of that. If you like, anybody that wants a PDF of the slides that I'm going to show, you can just shoot me an email and say, hey Mark, I'd like that PDF, and I'll be happy to send it to you. So that way you can reference any of this stuff if you want to later. So don't hesitate to contact me if you need to. If you read something or saw something that's been very influential in your gardening and you want to share that with me, you know, send me an email, say, hey Mark, if you check this out and let me know about it. I'd love to hear about anything that's an inspiration to you in your garden. So first off, when we're talking about comparing or contrasting conventional and organic gardening, what's the big difference between the two? What's the main thing? Anybody? What do you think is the big difference between conventional and organic agriculture or gardening?
Organic means you don't. My understanding is you don't use hazardous chemicals, and you grow real food, not fake food, which is spelled PHUDE. It's imitation food. GMO food, mutation DNA, it's real food that's high in antioxidants, which help prevent aging and cancer.
Very good answer. And I don't know if everybody could hear, so I'll kind of repeat. It says you don't use chemicals in organic ag. You don't use genetically modified organisms or plants in organic ag. A lot of people feel that the food is more real. It's not, you don't have chemical residues and those kind of things on it. And those are excellent answers and very accurate. And that's the answer that most people will give. If you just went out and asked the man on the street, they'll tell you that's the big difference. In conventional ag, you'll have the use of chemical and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And in organic ag, they don't use chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Now, there are other differences, and we'll try to touch on some of those today, but that's kind of the one that usually pops in most people's minds right away. Thanks for that answer, by the way. Now, one thing I want to say going into this right from the start is, as I make comparisons between the two, I'm kind of speaking in real broad and general terms, and realize that people and farms kind of run the gamut on that scale. You can be, very conventional or very organic, or you can be somewhere in between. So if I say such and such is conventional gardening, and you're a conventional gardener and you don't necessarily agree with that, that's perfectly acceptable, because again, these kind of broad terms and definitions don't always apply to every individual. An example of somebody that might be kind of down the middle, I've met a lot of gardeners that kind of consider themselves organic gardeners, but, now and then, if they feel like they need a little extra chemical fertilizer, or if they need to spray something with a synthetic pesticide, now and then they might reach for some of those products and additives. So, you get people that are kind of right down the middle between the two. It's not always black and white, cut and dry, that kind of thing. Okay, so what are we talking about when we say chemical fertilizers or not chemical fertilizers? Well, most of us have seen the old, traditional bag of 10-10-10 that you can see in every garden center and farm store, across the country. And that's your big three fertilizers: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is what those numbers are on that bag. And again, those are man-made or man-processed fertilizers. So that's what we mean when we say chemical fertilizers. They're not coming from just a natural source. It's something that's been manufactured or produced through a industrial process. On the other hand, your organic fertilizers are again going to be organic materials. So, compost would be a real basic one that you can make at home. And of course, these things vary depending on scale. When you get into, what we call big ag, then you're talking about possibly, a big 1,000-acre cornfield or something, a corn farm. You bring in a big tank full of anhydrous ammonia is your nitrogen source. So, on the garden scale, you might have your bag of 10-10-10. On your large factory farm scale, you might have big tanks of chemicals coming into the farm. And also on the organic side, there's all kinds of organic fertilizers that people can purchase or bring in. You have things like blood meal and bone meal, rock phosphate, green sand. There's a whole list of things that some organic people purchase and bring into their farm. But again, these are organically derived materials that are used to improve organic gardening if you're talking about a certified organic type situation. Now, one thing I'd like to touch on real quick, there's always, I shouldn't say always, but a common thing that comes up. And let's look at nitrogen as an example, because that's common. And nitrogen is always that first number on your bag of fertilizer. It tells you what the percentage of nitrogen is in that product. Blood meal is an organic nitrogen source. One form of nitrogen that plants can use is nitrate nitrogen. And somebody will always say, okay, nitrate is nitrate. And that's true, no matter the source. There's no, once you get to the nitrate form of nitrogen that plants can use, it's no different from the nitrate that you get here and the nitrate that you get here. So somebody says, well, what's the big deal? Why are we even concerned about, if I use chemicals or not? Because the nitrate's going to be the same. That is true. The difference is mode of delivery. Now, what do I mean by that? The difference is whether we're taking a conventional soluble fertilizer, a chemical fertilizer, and feeding the plant directly, or if we're feeding the plant through the soil system. That's the big difference. And that, probably more than anything else, is the foundation of organic gardening, of the whole thought process that developed into organic gardening. Because the theory was, and it's just human nature, once you take the chemical fertilizers and start feeding them to the plant directly, you're probably going to start neglecting your soil system. Because in the older organic way of gardening or farming, the soil was your basis. You had to take care of that soil and keep the soil fertile. Because again, it was that soil system that you were relying on to feed your plant. Well, if you can bypass the soil and just start feeding the chemical fertilizers directly to the plants, human nature is that, well, I don't have to be maybe quite as concerned with the soil.
Am I understanding correctly that with the conventional, you feed it to the plants, but with the organic, you put it ahead before the plants start to grow? Is that correct?
Pretty much. Or it's that you're basically feeding or charging or making sure the soil is fertile and letting the soil feed.
And then the plants is going to grow in that soil.
Right.
In other words, it's a difference. I see. Okay. That's a good. I didn't know that. I'm glad you brought that up.
So that's where you get the basis of the divide. Do I want to feed the plants directly, or do I want to care for my soil and let my soil feed the plants for me? I don't know why this thing is suddenly jumping around.
You're putting the.
Can you see if they've got this? I don't know if this may need a battery.
So you're putting the fertilizer in the soil before you submit the plant.
Well, yeah. Yes and no. I'm not sure why this is freaking out all of a sudden. Hopefully we can stop that in a minute. But, let me say this another way. The conventional or chemical fertilizers are inorganic and soluble right away. So they can feed the plants right away. On your organic fertilizers, they are not immediately water soluble, and they actually rely on microbial activity in the soil to convert them to a form that's usable by the plant. So that's where the soil system becomes key. The soil system actually makes that fertility available to the plants. So with the conventional chemicals, they're already water soluble when they come out of the bag or come out of the tank, and they can go directly to the plant and feed the plant. On the organic nutrients, they are actually insoluble in their organic form, and it's the microbes in the soil and their activity that actually convert those into a usable form that the plants can use. So it's not so much that you're applying them ahead of time. Yes, you are, but you could also say, well, I'm going to go in and apply my chemicals ahead of time too, maybe before the start. So it's not.
Chemicals are liquid and actually add to water here. And I say,
Or well, they could be granular as well, but it's that they are water soluble.
Right.
They're already in a form.
First rain, you
that
got,
can be
yeah.
taken up by the
Yeah.
plant. Where the organic materials, as they come out of the bag or come out of your compost heap, the majority of those are not water soluble, and it takes that conversion by the microbes in the soil to get them to a form that the plants can use. Hope, see if this thing's gonna work. It's gonna start freaking out on us.
You want me to get manually?
If we have to, maybe. Okay. Let me just turn this. If this freaks out,
Okay.
and here's just some examples. And here's some examples of your chemical and organic pesticides. You know, everybody's kind of seen the old traditional bottle setting dust as a synthetic, man-made pesticide, like glyphosate, Roundup, weed killers. And then you also have a whole host of pesticides that you can use on the organic side, but they're not synthesized, they're of organic nature. Things like neem oil, spinosad, diaphil dust, there's all kinds of things. If you, there's a couple things that you can find, like if you're interested in seeing what pesticides are allowed or recommended in organic gardening, OMRI is one source. It's the Organic Materials Review Institute, and they have lists, of things that are allowed in organic gardening. You'll also see that on the labels. They'll, usually have that OMRI certification. This is an excellent source for any pesticide that you're ever considering using, whether it's organic or chemical. It's this National Pesticide Information Center. The USDA and Oregon State University teamed up to put that out. And they have really good, just kind of summary sheets on pesticides that tell you what it is, what it's supposed to do, what any concerns with it may be, whether it's suspected to cause cancer, all kinds of just general things that you might be interested in knowing. And it's just real quick and concise without having you sit and read through like a 20-page label on a pesticide can. I highly recommend that. Now, real quick, I just want to say that whole label of conventional that we have now with modern agriculture, keep in mind that that's only been the convention for about the last, 100, 150 years. So in the grand scheme of human agriculture that's been going on for thousands of years, what we now consider as a convention has only been the convention for a relatively short amount of time.
It's almost like it's on automatic.
So when did all this start? Now, something you'll often hear, and I know I've heard it, you may have heard it, a lot of people say, well, conventional ag started after World War II. And I kept hearing that, and then I started reading, and I started hearing and referencing things that were well before that. So I wanted to dig into that a little deeper. And it's true that conventional ag really took off or expanded or exploded a lot after World War II. But the seeds of it actually started with the Industrial Revolution, which I like to just reference to, started kind of close to the American Revolution, which was 1776. So 1760 is close to that time frame. So, quite a while back, the seeds were sown. And so before that, again, you had thousands of years of organic agriculture because, there were no chemicals back then. Your labor was primarily by humans and animals. You didn't have all the mechanization and machines that we have today. And the success or failure was dependent on the farmers or the society's skill in caring for their soil, and that soil is the foundation for that ag. Now, does that mean that it was always, roses and sunshine? No, man has made many agricultural mistakes throughout history, and just because it was organic doesn't mean it was great or perfect. One thing you can study is what they call human-induced desertification or desertification, which means land that was made into desert by human activities, by human agricultural activity. So desertification contributed to the collapse of Rome, Carthage, and Greece. And again, these weren't climatic changes. These were changes in the soil system that were brought about by poor farming or poor agricultural practice. The decline of the Roman Empire is a story of deforestation, soil exhaustion, and erosion. Their former bountifully rich topsoil is now lying at the bottom of the sea. So again, once fertile area basically made into desert. With deforestation, the Mediterranean region, which was originally had a mild humid character, is now very arid because of the lack of forest cover. That's an organic philosophy in and of itself. Trees invite rain. If you want to, or another way of saying it is trees and the natural vegetation of an area greatly influence the way water is cycled in the environment. So if you want to keep water turning, keep water in the system, keep rain coming, don't deforest or denude an area. Of course, you don't have to go back to Rome and Carthage and Greece to see human desertification. We had our own Dust Bowl in the 1930s. You're making a pretty good desert when you can bury a wagon up to the top of its wheels in soil, or bury up to the ridge line there. So again, loss of topsoil through poor farming practice. This is current today. This is Haiti on the left side and the Dominican Republic on the right side. You follow that border by the deforestation. In the Dominican Republic, they have laws against deforestation. In Haiti, they don't, and they harvest all the wood they can get their hands on to make charcoal for fuel. And Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, there are geopolitical reasons and other reasons that fall into that, but the core reason is they don't have any soil left. Soil is the foundation of any society. If you don't have that soil asset to build everything else off of, you're going to have poverty. They get so much erosion, they no longer have food security. They're totally reliant on imported food, or nobody could live there. And when rain comes, look at all this topsoil washing out to the sea, and there's no longer tree cover and vegetation to slow that rain down. So, you have all this flooding that's greatly exacerbated. So, all those systems, when they start to break down, you just have a cascading effect of problem after problem. Okay, so 1760 comes along, the Industrial Revolution gets underway. I call that the rise of the machines. Now you have man figuring out how to harness machines and make mechanized processes. And that's considered the most important event in human history since man learned to domesticate animals, plants, and fire. So that's a biggie. We learned how to use fire. We learned how to, keep animals, cultivate plants. That's big things. And then the Industrial Revolution runs right up there with that. There's actually two parts to the Industrial Revolution, according to the historians. The first part went to about 1840, and then they classified the second part from 1840 to 1914, or right up to the start of World War I. And that second section is also known as the technological revolution. Right about that transition time, right around 1840, back up just a second, we talked about mechanization, all the machine processes coming along. That's what put that idea into agriculture. This is a fertilizer ad from the 1950s. But man started to key into the efficiencies of the factory process, of the mechanization process, and realized they could produce goods much more efficiently by that factory system. Well, so then they started thinking, well, hey, why don't we apply that factory idea to our farmers? Try to apply that efficiency to the farming system. So you get that whole concept of inputs in or raw materials in, and you start to view the soil as a machine, as part of the mechanism, part of the system. And you're going to speed up that soil, speed up that production process, and try to blow as much product out the other side as you can. The organic argument to that is that that'll never work because the soil can never be a machine, just like man can never be a machine. Factories have replaced a lot of human jobs because humans can't be machines. We can't keep up with machines. Well, oftentimes the soil can't keep up with machines either. Okay, so about that transition period, you have this German chemist, Justin von Liebig, comes along. And he had a big influence, him and his compadres at that time. They started identifying all the different nutrients and elements that plants needed to grow and survive. And he developed a way to extract nitrogen, one of the big nutrients that we need to grow plants, from the atmosphere. Now, he's considered the father of the fertilizer industry because of all the work that he did to identify chemicals. They start thinking, well, if we can find sources for these chemicals now, we've got a market for those kind of things. However, the early processes of nitrogen extraction that they came up with were never commercially successful because they weren't efficient. They just weren't cost effective to be a big success. About that time, though, you actually have an organic source of nitrogen that's discovered, nitrogen and other nutrients, which was Peruvian guano, manure from seabirds. They found these islands off the coast of Peru, and I don't know how many eons it took of birds pooping on that island to build up enough where you had a resource that you could come in there and mine. But now you have a market developed. People realize the need for nutrients for their crops. They find, people find nutrients and say, hey, we can market this stuff. So between 1840 and 1870, they extracted 10 million tons of bird guano from that area, and they start marketing it to farmers. Put it on your corn, your garden. Its use is going to secure you a successful crop. And that planted the idea for fertilizer in a bag, or importing your fertilizer. So the guano trade was key in, nowadays we consider input intensive farming, again, where we're trucking in nutrients, growing a crop, shipping it out. That's kind of what set the stage for that mindset. By 1870, they had pretty much exhausted that supply of seabird manure. And luckily, they found a natural source of sodium nitrate in Chile. And they fought a war over control of that. And so now they're mining nitrate there in Chile, the sodium nitrate deposit, and exporting that, Chilean nitrates, which, by the way, you can still find to purchase today. It's quite expensive, but it's still out there. Along that same time, Sir John Laws in Europe developed a process for making phosphate, superphosphate fertilizer. He also established the Rothamsted Experiment Station, which is the oldest agriculture experiment station in the world that still exists today. And by the end of that century, the last decade there, 1890 to 99, you had U.S. fertilizer consumption of 2 million tons annually, roughly 2 million tons. And you can see how this is ramping up because in the start of the 20th century, the first decade there, that number has almost doubled, almost up to 4 million tons. So you can see people are getting that idea of, hey, I can purchase my fertilizer now, and I don't have to spend as much time, spreading manure and making compost and doing all these organic things. I can just bring that fertility in. Now, here's a big. The Haber-Bosch nitrogen extraction process. In the early 1900s, these are two other German gentlemen, Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch. Haber's actually credited with inventing the process, and Bosch kind of commercialized it and brought it to market. They developed the nitrogen extraction process that's still in use today. They figured out a cost-effective, economical, or efficient way to extract anhydrous ammonia, ammonium nitrate, and urea. That one development is credited as being what they call the detonator of the population explosion. In other words, without their invention of efficient nitrogen extraction, there wouldn't be 7+ billion humans on the planet today. That one invention is what allowed this fantastic increase from under 2 billion of us to over 7 billion of us now, and still going so far. So again, a big development. They say now, a figure I saw is that roughly 80% of the nitrogen in human tissue you can credit to Haber-Bosch process as being the source. So there's your chemical nitrogen. And just to give you an idea of where we stand on fertilizer consumption now, there was a peak in 1981. We've made it up to 24 million tons annually of fertilizer consumed. And the reason that peaked in 81 was political. The Russian grain embargo, they took about 30 to 40 million acres out of production because of that embargo. That's why it peaked and then dropped off some in 1981. And the last few years we've been back up. It's been right around 22 million tons for the last several years. So, and by the way, nitrogen use since 1960 has grown more than any other fertilizer. You kind of look at that, or people sort of blame that or credit that for two reasons. One being, in some cases, the GMO crops, or sometimes just hybrids, crops that can take more nitrogen, like corn varieties that they can really throw the nitrogen to and grow a big crop. Other people also say the reason for that is continued soil degradation, because as the soil continues to decline, it takes more and more nitrogen, more and more fertilizer inputs to make up for that poor soil. So kind of two ways that you might look at it. I don't know, they probably both are right. I wouldn't swear that one or other is the answer. So that gives you kind of a quick little background, I think. Hopefully it was quick enough on how that conventional side, that chemical side came about, and what the history was in that. By the way, the reasons it was Germans, the reason it was Haber-Bosch that came up with that process, you think about the time frame, early 1900s, right before World War I. The other big thing that they needed nitrogen for, really the main thing they needed nitrogen for, the agricultural side just came in kind of later as a side benefit. The big thing they needed nitrogen for was making ammunition and bombs, because World War I's on the horizon, and those nitrogen sources Britain controlled, and they weren't giving Germany access to. So Germany had a lot of incentive to come up with a way to extract nitrogen themselves. That's why, you know, it was the necessity being the mother of invention. That's why it ended up being the Germans that came up with that. So all those things are going on the conventional or chemical side, and basically the organic people start coming along as a counter to that, or they had concerns with what was happening there. This is one of the earliest books that came out on organic farming or agriculture, and actually the original title was just Farmer in 40 Centuries, because in 1911 when it was published, you know, nobody was really using the term organic. They added that later on nowadays to sell that book to people nowadays. So originally it wasn't called organic farming, it was just called Farmers in 40 Centuries. But F.H. King had came through the USDA. He was a soil scientist and botanist, and he was becoming concerned about chemical ag and, you know, its effect on the soil. And like we talked about, he said the exhaustion of cultivated fields must have always been the most fundamental, vital, and difficult problem of all people. And he took off and traveled through China, Korea, and Japan, because at that time they were still practicing, you know, primitive agriculture or old-style traditional agriculture that wasn't mechanized, wasn't using any chemicals. And he wanted to kind of just observe those systems, because there were many parts in those countries that had been producing crops for thousands of years successfully. So he wanted to document what they were doing and how they were doing it, and, you know, kind of bring that back in book form. Also in the early 1900s, a German, Rudolf Steiner, comes along, and he developed a whole system called biodynamics. If you've ever seen the Barefoot Farmer guy that's on the MPT, he's really into biodynamic agriculture. That's that whole system. It's kind of another label of organic agriculture, so to speak. This guy I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. He was a Japanese gentleman, Fukuoka. He was a agricultural scientist and researcher, and he became disillusioned. A lot of times in research, they'll pinpoint and they'll study, you know, a little piece of a system or problem, and, you know, this guy over here is studying something different, this guy's studying something different. And Fukuoka wanted to study the whole system, so he dropped out of being a research guy and went back to his dad's farm, because he wanted to study the whole farm, the whole system. I'll talk a bit more about him in a second. 1938, USDA put out a yearbook called Soils and Men, and you can still download that today. It's available at the National Agricultural Library. And again, it's not called an organic publication because they still weren't using that term yet. But a lot of people look on that as a good kind of organic gardening or farming manual today, because it's talking about kind of a lot of more what we call old school techniques or organic techniques that you still might employ today. There's also another really good source for older publications that are still relevant to agricultural farming or gardening. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. I kind of consider the farm, you know, kind of a bigger operation, the garden more on the home scale. A lot of times the techniques are the same, just altered, you know, for the scale. But also at the National Agricultural Library, you can look for that organic roots collection, they call it, and just a whole host of documents that are available there. Now there's Mr. Fukuoka again. After about 40 years, like I say, he dropped out from the ag science work in the 1930s and went to farming and studying and trying to figure out what he could figure out. And roughly 40 years later, they published his book, One Straw Revolution. And that's where that quote came from that I gave you earlier, where he said, when you get right down to it, there are a few agricultural practices that are really necessary. Now, he also said, and I left it out earlier, he also said no need to make compost. And any of y'all that have maybe sat through some of my compost presentations before. You probably know how I feel about that. But I want to put this statement into perspective and let you know what he's talking about here. Because what he was talking about, he developed a system that's became really influential on today's no-till agriculture. You hear that a lot. People talk about no-till, where they're trying to not plow or not rotary till the soil. And he was talking about, he basically grew barley and rice in rotation. And he came up with a system where he could just direct sow the barley and the rice and keep them rotating, and he used clover as a cover crop. And he developed a system where he never had to till. He would sow the seeds of one crop right into the stubble of another and develop that system. So that's where he's coming from on the whole idea of not plowing, not doing this, not doing that. And one of the things that F.H. King talks about in the Farmers of 40 Centuries book that we looked at earlier, there were areas in China and Japan, Korea, where the whole community would undertake massive efforts to make huge compost piles to feed their fields and keep them fertile. So it took a whole lot of human and sometimes animal labor to accomplish that. And that was one thing that Fukuoka was trying to avoid. Again, he was trying to make things easier instead of harder. So he was trying to avoid that system of making huge amounts of compost for the field crops like that. Now, Fukuoka did have a compost pile for his kitchen garden. So for us on the garden scale, I don't want you to think that he's telling you not to compost. He's talking about the system. In his field system, he didn't undertake that massive compost effort. He used the cover crops and the stubble from his existing crops to keep the organic matter in the fields. Living Soil is an influential work by Lady Eve Balfour from Britain, and that's a kind of a good work in another way too, because it pulls together a lot of thought and sources that were going on at the time. So it's a good overview. She touches on a couple other people that I'm going to mention here as well, and kind of pulls a lot of that thought together. She established the Soil Association, which is still the predominant organic agriculture organization in the UK. A lot of organic gardeners and farmers are very concerned with health of the soil, and how that impacts health of the whole environment, the whole system. And she says the health of man, beast, plant, and soil is one individual whole. So again, you want to start with that foundation of healthy soil so that it grows healthy plants, feed healthy animals and healthy men, and the whole system is made whole. You'll hear people reference, and of course we still have that today. People talk about all the refined and processed foods. And often in some of these earlier works, they'll come up and they'll say, our country's falling apart because of white bread. They took bread and took all the good stuff out of it, with all this processing. And, she makes a statement, health, as we have almost forgotten, should be our natural state. It shouldn't take as many pills and potions and patents to keep us healthy. It should be, based on good food. So, you find that a lot in the organic philosophy. I'll talk about Lord Northbourne here in a minute. He has another British guy. He has a book called Look to the Land that was very influential in a lot of organic gardening. In 1942, you had the first use of the famous DDT pesticide on a farm, and I thought it was coincidental that was the same year that Jerome Rodale began to publish Organic Gardening magazine, which was called Organic Farming and Gardening. I think nowadays it's called Organic Life or something. They changed the title recently. Here's another biggie, Sir Albert Howard, and that's kind of a seminal work in organic writing organic philosophy and agricultural testament. So much so that you'll sometimes hear people say that chemical gardeners or farmers are followers of Liebig, the German chemist, and organic gardeners and farmers are followers of Howard. So, you kind of have those two big father figures on each side of those movements. He did a lot of research in India and developed a composting process, which is still pretty much what they teach today through the Extension Service. He used the word artificials. They weren't always using the term chemical back in those days. And one of his famous statements was artificial plants, artificial animals, and artificial men are unhealthy and they can only be protected by medicines and doctors and all that stuff. So again, that idea that if you base your system on healthy soil, it transmits to a healthier man. He said nature has ordained that the soil must live. The soil can't be a machine. It has to be a living entity. And he was also one of the first people to write about mycorrhizal fungi, which is something else you can study, and a lot of people talk about today, that symbiotic relationship between fungi in the soil, and many plants have that mycorrhizal association between their roots and fungi in the soil. That's a whole other topic that's interesting to read about. A lot of these older works you can get for free. There's an online library called soilhealthweb.org, and many of these publications that are out of print or in limited print, they have on there, and you can download them for free. That's a really good source. Okay, you have all the chemical ag starting and ramping up, especially in the early 1900s. And that led to quite a few problems, and they needed all these pesticides, and that whole industry really exploded after World War II. That was a big thing following World War II, because all the work that they did to kill humans with chemicals during the war, they could now take that and use that to kill pests. And a response to that came in the early 60s from Rachel Carson. A real famous book was called Silent Spring. And she was making commentary to a lot of the spray programs and things that they had going on in the 1950s, which not only didn't work against the pests that they were trying to control, but it oftentimes had very damaging effects to birds, wildlife. Some of them even virtually wiped out like salmon runs that had been in existence for thousands of years. So you get those unintended consequences when we think, oh, we're going to solve the problem by applying this chemical, but then you have all these other things that you damage or destroy in the process. And she was very concerned about chemical carcinogens in these chemicals, and made the point that a lot of these chemicals are by no means necessity. We'd be just as well off without them, was her viewpoint. And by eliminating them, she said the threat of 1 in 4 of us developing cancer would be greatly mitigated. Get those cancer-causing chemicals out of the environment to reduce the cancer risk. And I thought, okay, 1 in 4, about 25%, when she wrote that in 1960, I was curious to see what today's cancer rates are. And unfortunately, if those stats are all true, we're headed in the wrong direction still, because in 2015, it's up around 40%. So, again, that whole thought of, if we could get a lot of these chemicals out of the environment, we'd probably be better off. Elliot Coleman is a real influential writer. That's where that statement I read you at the very first. You kind of have 3 school of thoughts, at least it's kind of the way I divide it in my mind. You have the conventional system where, you know, synthetic chemical pesticides are fine. You have kind of the start of organic thought where, well, I don't want to use chemicals and synthetics, I at least want to use organic pesticides. And then you have guys like Elliot, which I consider kind of more what I call deep organic, which is, well, why don't I just not use pesticides at all? You know, and this is something that shows up in Lord Northbourne's writing. They consider pesticides as what they call a palliative. And to palliate is to relieve or lessen without curing. They look on pests as an indicator that something's wrong. If you have a pest outbreak that's large enough or big enough to give you trouble, it's just a sign that you're doing something wrong. Either, you know, you've let your organic matter, you know, content drop too much in your soil, or you had a pH imbalance. In other words, they look on that as a sign of, well, there's something that I can correct. If I go and I just attack that pest, I might be able to maybe get some control over that pest, but I haven't solved the underlying problem that caused that pest outbreak to start with. And you see that same argument in the field of medicine. You know, do you just treat a symptom, or do you go beyond that and treat the underlying cause of that symptom to, you know, totally cure it? Or do you just continually treat a symptom without ever, you know, curing the cause? So it's that same kind of idea. Wendell Berry has been a very influential modern writer. He says for the conventional obsession with production, profit, and expansion, a healthier agriculture would have a more complex consciousness. And we list many specifics of what that consciousness might include. But he says, to put it plainly, you would replace the concern with production for a concern with reproduction. Now, what does he mean by that? We talked about before a conventional idea of putting in inputs, your fertilizers, producing as much product you can, sending it off to market. It's kind of a one-way system there. You always have to have that raw material and fertilizer input coming in and shipping it out. On the other hand, if you can reproduce, you know, that's a big thing you hear now, sustainable ag. Can you, instead of that one-way system of resources, can you make it sustainable or reproducible, where the farm or garden feeds itself? You know, its own product is turned back into the system to feed itself. That's the basic concept behind that concept of sustainability. One thing to realize is your base energy source. In conventional gardening, the base energy is fossil fuels. In an organic system, the base energy is sunlight. Now, what do I mean by that? In an organic system, you rely on sunlight energy to grow the plants, to feed to make the produce, to feed the livestock, feed the humans, and then all the biomass, everything that's left over is returned to the soil. Again, that whole process of recycling, regenerating. In a conventional system, without electricity and natural gas produced by fossil fuels for nitrogen extraction, and without oil and natural gas for pesticide manufacture, the whole system would just collapse. So that's why I say that's fossil fuel based, that's solar based. That's not to say people aren't using tractors and using fossil fuels on this side, but if all that went away, it would take more labor, more human and animal labor, but you could keep this system going without fossil fuel energy. In this system, without fossil fuel energy for those processes, you just simply couldn't do it anymore. Michael Pollan, a lot of people enjoy reading his books, and he's had several documentaries on public television, about food systems, where our foods come from. In his book, On the Board Dilemma, he had a commentary on that whole issue of whether the cycle of fertility is sun-driven or whether you're buying the fertility in a bag. So that whole thing that we've been talking about. That's an interesting read, On the Board Dilemma. Oftentimes you have monoculture in big ag, and we're just growing one thing and nothing else. In a deeper organic system, you tend to strive for more diversity, more variety of life. That doesn't always happen. Nowadays, you have what they call industrial ag, where they're taking the same kind of conventional big farming systems and they're just substituting organic, materials instead of conventionally derived materials. So that's not always the case. And of course, you don't even have to go into agriculture or gardening per se to see monoculture. You can drive through the typical suburban neighborhood and see guys like this guy who, want to wipe every bit of life off their property and have nothing left but their lawn, And so that's monoculture in and of itself there on the home scale. Here to me is one of the big things between the two systems, between the two schools of thought, between the two philosophies. You got to decide whether you want to be at war with nature or in harmony with nature. Do you want to go into your garden with the idea that you're going to control it, you're going to dominate it, you're going to conquer nature, have superiority over nature? Or do you go in with the idea that you're going to, feed off of nature or support nature, let nature help you as much as it can? This is from the 1950s, and you still see that kind of language in advertisements today. Murder, death, bomb. The whole idea that insects are a nuisance and something that we shouldn't tolerate, and something that we should eliminate and get rid of. This black flag in the 50s was an aerosol DDT product. And let's show the happy homeowner spraying it in the living room, spraying it on the clothes, get a big face full of it as you spray it. There's no concern that I'm going to kill all these insects, but I'm also harming myself. The only thing that they talk about in this ad was that the spray wasn't flammable. So if you think about that time period in the 1950s, that means you could go around the house spraying your aerosol and keep smoking your cigarettes at the same time. You weren't going to blow your house up. So the organic argument to that is that, you might try to fight nature, but you're only fighting yourself. Lord Northburn says we could not separate ourselves from nature if we would. That's about as sensible as a man that would try to cut off his own head because he felt it was superior to the rest of his body. We can't be superior to nature because we're a part of nature. You see, we have invented or imagined this fight between ourselves and nature. So of course, the whole of nature, which includes ourselves and the soil, suffers. So again, that idea of nurturing nature, not trying to control or dominate nature, but nurture it, be a part of it. And we already talked about that idea where again the soil is seen as a machine, part of the industry, or the soil is seen as the base, the everything, living entity, Just to kind of wrap up some sort of more modern or recent developments, 1984 was when the CSA program started appearing in the United States. The community supported ag thing, where you pay the farmer in advance and he gives you a box of food every week or whatever the system is. The Slow Food Organization started in Italy in the 1980s. And that still goes on, and that's the inspiration for a lot of these local food and farm-to-table kind of movements that are going on nowadays. California Organic Foods Act in 1990 was very influential on the USDA standards, which appeared in 2001. That's when the whole certified organic thing started. And most people would agree that overall, that has been a good thing, having, kind of a set system and formula for what's allowed and what's not allowed and what organic means as far as on the commercial scale like that. Joel Salatin, though, does remind us again that organic was an idea. It was more, like I say, back to what was your philosophy? What is your approach to how you're going to garden, more so than it was a list of do's and don'ts or things you can use and things that you're not going to use. And, some, farmers are independent sorts, and some farmers have kind of seen the USDA organic program as, they kind of took over, their philosophy and tried to turn it into a system kind of thing. So again, everybody has different opinions on all this stuff. Well, just in closing, ask yourself that when you go into your garden. What's your philosophy going to be? What's your approach going to be? Take advantage of some of these people that you can read about, and they'll lead you to many others. I just touched on a handful of people there. There's, hundreds and if not thousands of people out there that write on and have opinions on gardening and organic ag. I do want to say to you, obviously I'm a little bit skewed, I guess, because I am an organic gardener. So, my opinions on this, may differ a little bit from somebody that's coming from the conventional side. I try to be fair and impartial in doing this presentation, but obviously I have my own opinions that influence, I'm sure, anything that I put together. But I will tell you, just from my own experience, that if you want to go that route, you can certainly have a very productive and abundant and healthy garden without pesticides and chemicals. It's not going to fail on you. It's not going to be overrun. That's the thing with marketing. Sometimes we're led to believe that, if I'm not out there spraying and doing this and that and the other, I'm just going to be overrun with an avalanche of pests and bugs and stuff. And it just really doesn't happen that way if you give it a chance to, again, make sure that you're nurturing your soil, make your soil healthy, and give things a chance to go.